I'm Ellie Jones, 34, and for 8 years I built Morrison Associates from a struggling consultancy into a $500 million powerhouse. I recruited every major client, crafted every winning strategy, and worked 70-hour weeks while the CEO's nephew partied through his MBA program. Last month, David Morrison called me into his office with a smile that should have been my first warning. Ellie, we're restructuring. Trevor's joining as senior partner, and we'll need you to transition your client relationships to him. 8 years of loyalty, and he was handing my life's work to a 25-year-old who couldn't close a lemonade stand. But what David didn't know was that I'd been quietly documenting everything, and I had one final meeting that would change both our futures forever. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. If you've ever felt your hard work stolen by someone else's connections, like this video for the full story of how I turned betrayal into the sweetest victory. I still remember the day I walked into Morrison Associates for my first interview. Fresh out of Northwestern with my finance degree, I had this burning ambition to prove myself in the consulting world. The office was cramped, outdated, and desperately needed fresh energy. David Morrison sat across from me in a worn leather chair, his shirt slightly wrinkled, explaining how his 12-person firm was on the verge of something big. "I'm looking for someone hungry," he said, leaning forward with genuine enthusiasm. "Someone who wants to build something meaningful, not just collect a paycheck. This isn't going to be easy money, Ellie, but if you're willing to put in the work, we'll grow together. Partners. That's what I'm building here, a family of partners." The employment contract was basic, $45,000 salary, standard benefits, and a vague promise of performance-based advancement opportunities. I signed it without hesitation. Looking back at that document now, I see how naive I was. But at 26, I was hungry for the chance to prove myself. Those first months were brutal. I cold-called prospects for 8 hours a day, then spent evenings researching industries and crafting proposals. David worked alongside us, sharing pizza during late nights and celebrating every small win. When I landed my first client, a local manufacturing company worth $50,000 annually, he took the entire team out for dinner. "This is how we do it," he announced, raising his glass. "One relationship at a time. One trust bond at a time." The real breakthrough came 18 months later, when I connected with Janet Rodriguez, the CFO of TechFlow Industries. Most consultants saw her as intimidating, but I took time to understand her challenges. Her company was hemorrhaging money on inefficient processes, and previous consultants had given her cookie-cutter solutions that never fit her unique situation. I spent 3 weeks developing a customized approach, working nights and weekends to create something genuinely valuable. When I presented the proposal, Janet's eyes lit up. "Finally," she said, "someone who actually listened." TechFlow became our first $2 million annual client. David was ecstatic, treating me like the golden child I'd never been. "You're special, Ellie," he told me after the contract signing. "You understand what this business is really about. People don't buy consulting services, they buy trust." That became my philosophy. While other consultants focused on impressive presentations and industry buzzwords, I focused on understanding each client as a human being. I remembered birthdays, asked about family challenges, and genuinely cared about their success. It wasn't a strategy, it was who I was. The next 3 years were a whirlwind of growth. My reputation spread through industry networks, and referrals started pouring in. I landed Megacorp, a Fortune 500 manufacturing giant, after their previous consulting firm had failed spectacularly. James Wright, their CEO, was skeptical of consultants in general, but something about my approach resonated with him. "You actually read our annual reports going back 5 years, he said during our first meeting. "Most consultants show up with generic presentations and hope we don't notice." Megacorp's account was worth $15 million annually, transforming Morrison Associates overnight. Pinnacle Systems followed 6 months later, a $12 million technology client whose CEO, Maria Santos, appreciated my attention to detail and personal touch. Then came Global Dynamics, worth $18 million, led by Robert Chan, who valued my strategic thinking and cultural sensitivity. By year 5, I had personally brought in over $85 million in annual revenue. The firm had grown from 12 employees to 47, and I was managing a team of 15 top-tier consultants. Industry publications were calling me a rising star in consulting, and I was speaking at conferences about relationship-based business development. David seemed genuinely proud. "You've exceeded every expectation," he told me during my 5-year review. "I always knew you were special, but this," he gestured at the revenue charts covering his wall, "this is extraordinary. We need to talk about making this partnership official." But somehow, that conversation never happened. There was always another quarter to prove myself, another milestone to reach. I started noticing subtle delays in my promised advancement, excuses about market conditions, and organizational restructuring. Still, I trusted David's word. He'd been like a father figure, and I believed his repeated assurances that partnership was just around the corner. The first warning sign came during a seemingly innocent family dinner David hosted for senior staff. It was October 2019, and the firm was celebrating our best year yet. David's wife, Patricia, had prepared an elaborate meal, and the atmosphere was warm and familial, exactly the culture David had always promoted. "I want you all to meet someone special," David announced, standing with a glass of wine. "My nephew Trevor is joining us for dinner. He's in his final year at Wharton, studying for his MBA, and he's the future of this company." Trevor Morrison walked in like he owned the place. 23 years old, perfectly styled hair, and an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He shook hands with everyone, but his grip was weak, and his eye contact felt performative, rather than genuine. "Uncle David's told me so much about the team," he said, his voice carrying that particular blend of privilege and entitlement I'd learned to recognize. "I'm excited to bring some fresh thinking to the business. MBA programs today are really focused on disrupting traditional models." I smiled politely, but something about his tone rubbed me wrong. When he learned I was responsible for our largest clients, his demeanor shifted slightly, not impressed, but calculating. "Interesting," he said. "I've been studying relationship-based consulting models in my strategic management class. There are some really innovative approaches to client acquisition that don't require such intensive time investments." David beamed proudly. "Trevor's been analyzing our business model for one of his case studies. He's got some fascinating insights about scalability and efficiency." The conversation continued, but I found myself studying Trevor's expressions. He spoke about our clients, my clients, like they were data points in a spreadsheet, rather than human relationships built over years of trust. When James Wright's name came up, Trevor nodded knowingly. "Megacorp, right? I've read their public filings. Classic inefficiencies in their supply chain management. Pretty straightforward consulting opportunity." I bit my tongue. If he thought Megacorp was straightforward, he understood nothing about the 18 months of careful relationship building it had taken to earn James Wright's trust, or the personal challenges James had shared with me about navigating his company through a difficult merger. After dinner, David walked me to my car. "Trevor's impressive, isn't he? Patricia and I are so proud. He'll be finishing his MBA next spring, and I'm thinking about bringing him on board." "That's wonderful," I said carefully. "What role are you considering?" "Senior consultant to start, but with fast-track advancement. He's family, you know, and he's got those fresh MBA perspectives we need to stay competitive." I drove home with an uneasy feeling I couldn't quite name. Trevor seemed intelligent enough, but there was something about his attitude that concerned me. More troubling was David's obvious pride and favoritism. In 8 years, I'd never seen him light up about any employee the way he did when talking about Trevor. The summer internship confirmed my worst fears. Trevor arrived at Morrison Associates in June 2020, with the swagger of someone who'd already earned his place rather than someone there to learn. His first week, he critiqued our office layout, suggesting we needed more collaborative spaces and innovative design elements. "The whole aesthetic feels dated," he told David during a team meeting. "If we want to attract Fortune 500 clients, we need to look the part." I wanted to point out that we already had several Fortune 500 clients who seemed perfectly satisfied with our results. But David was nodding thoughtfully. "Trevor's right. We should modernize." "Ellie, you work with these big clients. What do you think?" It was a trap disguised as consultation. If I disagreed, I'd seem resistant to improvement. If I agreed, I'd be validating Trevor's criticism of the environment where I'd built my success. "Our clients care more about results than aesthetics," I said diplomatically, "but there's always room for enhancement." Trevor's real test came when David assigned him to shadow me on client calls. The first disaster was with Pinnacle Systems. Maria Santos had called about concerns with their quarterly projections, a sensitive topic requiring careful handling. I'd prepared Trevor during the drive over. "Maria's been through a difficult divorce recently," I explained. "She's dealing with a lot of stress, so she might seem short-tempered. The key is to listen first, offer solutions second. Don't interrupt her when she's explaining the situation." The meeting started well. Maria appreciated that I'd brought a future partner to understand her account better. She launched into a detailed explanation of her budget concerns, and I was taking careful notes, preparing to offer several strategic options. Then Trevor interrupted. "Excuse me, Maria, can I call you Maria? This sounds like a classic resource allocation inefficiency. Have you considered implementing zero-based budgeting protocols?" The room went silent. Maria's expression shifted from collaborative to icy. "I'm sorry," she said. Trevor, oblivious to the tension, continued. "Zero-based budgeting. Instead of incremental adjustments to existing budgets, you rebuild every department's allocation from scratch each quarter. It's a disruptive approach that eliminates legacy inefficiencies." Maria looked at me with barely concealed annoyance. "Ellie, is this really the direction Morrison Associates is heading? Because buzzword solutions aren't what I pay you for." I spent the next 20 minutes rebuilding the conversation, apologizing subtly for the interruption, and refocusing on Maria's actual concerns. After we left, I tried to explain what had gone wrong. "Maria doesn't respond well to generic solutions," I told Trevor. "She's been burned by consultants who throw around business school terminology without understanding her specific challenges." Trevor's response stunned me. "I think she was just resistant to new ideas. That's pretty common with older executives. They get comfortable with outdated approaches." Maria Santos was 42 years old, brilliant, and had transformed Pinnacle Systems from a struggling startup into a technology leader. Dismissing her as an older executive resistant to change showed Trevor understood nothing about client relationships or business dynamics. But when David asked about the meeting, Trevor spun it differently. "Great learning experience," he reported. "The client seemed set in her ways, but I think I opened her mind to some innovative approaches. Ellie did a nice job supporting the presentation." Supporting the presentation? I had salvaged the presentation. Similar disasters followed with other clients. Trevor interrupted Robert Chun during a sensitive discussion about global dynamics expansion strategy, offering unsolicited advice about leveraging synergistic opportunities. He critiqued James Wright's leadership style, suggesting Megacorp needed more agile decision-making frameworks. Each time, I had to repair the damage while Trevor remained oblivious to the chaos he'd created. Worse, David seemed blind to the problems, focusing instead on Trevor's fresh perspectives and innovative thinking. The breaking point came during Trevor's final week. I'd arranged for him to observe a presentation to a potential new client, $8 million healthcare company considering switching from their current consulting firm. The CEO, Linda Foster, had been impressed by our initial proposal and was ready to move forward. I prepared a careful presentation, addressing her specific concerns about operational efficiency and regulatory compliance. Trevor was supposed to observe silently and learn about client acquisition. 10 minutes into my presentation, Trevor stood up. Linda, sorry. Dr. Foster, what Ellie's describing is fine for traditional approaches, but have you considered blockchain solutions for your compliance tracking? Dr. Foster blinked in confusion. Blockchain? For healthcare compliance? Trevor launched into a 5-minute explanation of distributed ledger technology that had nothing to do with her actual needs. Dr. Foster's interest visibly evaporated as Trevor used terms like decentralized validation protocols and smart contract integration. After the meeting, Dr. Foster pulled me aside. Ellie, I've always respected Morrison's professionalism, but if this is the direction you're heading, bringing in consultants who suggest blockchain for everything, maybe we should reconsider. It took 3 follow-up meetings and a significantly reduced fee structure to save the account. Trevor never acknowledged his mistake, instead telling David that Dr. Foster was probably not ready for cutting-edge solutions anyway. When I privately expressed concerns to David about Trevor's client interactions, his response was deeply troubling. Trevor's young, he said dismissively. He needs time to develop his client skills. But his strategic thinking is exceptional. You have to admit, he brings energy and innovation we haven't had before. Innovation? Trevor's ideas were recycled business school concepts with no practical application to our clients' real challenges. But David seemed determined to see brilliance, where I saw incompetence. The summer ended with Trevor returning to finish his MBA, but the damage was done. I'd spent 3 months protecting client relationships from his well-intentioned disasters while David praised his contributions to the firm. More concerning was David's obvious plan to fast-track Trevor upon graduation. During Trevor's farewell dinner, David made it clear that a senior position awaited him. We'll have a spot ready for you when you graduate, David announced. Senior consultant, maybe senior partner if you keep showing this kind of strategic thinking. Senior partner. It took me 8 years to build this company into what it was, and Trevor was being promised senior partner after a disastrous 3-month internship. That night, I called my friend Sarah Kim, an employment attorney I'd met through industry networking. I need to understand my options, I told her. I've built this company's success, but I'm starting to think I'll never get the recognition I deserve. Sarah's advice was sobering. Do you have anything in writing about partnership promises? Email commitments, contract amendments, anything documenting your contributions? I realized I didn't. 8 years of verbal promises, handshake agreements, and David's repeated assurances about partnership being just around the corner, nothing legally binding. Start documenting everything, Sarah advised. Save emails, record meetings where legally permissible, keep detailed records of your client. Relationships and business development. If this goes bad, you'll need evidence. I started keeping meticulous records, but I hoped I was being paranoid. David had been like family. Surely he wouldn't let nepotism destroy everything we built together. I was about to learn how wrong I was. Trevor graduated from Wharton in May 2021 with his MBA and immediately joined Morrison Associates as a strategic consultant, a title that had never existed before and came with a salary higher than consultants who'd been with the firm for 5 years. David announced it during our Monday morning team meeting with obvious pride. I'm excited to welcome Trevor Morrison as our newest strategic consultant, David said, beaming. He'll be focusing on business development and client strategy, working closely with our senior team to bring innovative approaches to our practice. I watched my colleagues' faces carefully. Most managed polite smiles, but I caught the subtle eye rolls and barely concealed frustration. Trevor was being handed opportunities that others had spent years earning. Trevor's first solo client presentation was scheduled for the following week with a potential new account, Riverside Manufacturing, a mid-sized company considering switching from their current consulting firm. It was worth approximately $3 million annually, and David positioned it as Trevor's chance to prove himself. I offered to help with preparation, but Trevor waved me off. "I've got this," he said confidently. "MBA programs really emphasize presentation skills. I think you'll be impressed with what I've learned." The presentation was a disaster of epic proportions. Trevor had prepared a generic PowerPoint filled with business school buzzwords and theoretical frameworks that had nothing to do with Riverside's actual challenges. He spoke about leveraging synergistic paradigms and optimizing value chain efficiencies, while the Riverside executives stared in bewildered silence. The final straw came when Trevor suggested they implement agile methodologies across all vertical silos without understanding that Riverside was a traditional manufacturing company with established production processes that couldn't be restructured on a whim. Tom Bradley, Riverside's CEO, ended the meeting 20 minutes early. "Thank you for your time," he said stiffly. "We'll be in touch." We never heard from them again. When I asked Trevor how it went, he shrugged. Not sure they were ready for advanced strategic thinking. Some companies are just stuck in traditional mindsets. David's response was even more troubling. Instead of recognizing Trevor's failure, he blamed external factors. "It's a tough market," he told me privately. Riverside probably had unrealistic expectations. Trevor's approach was sound, maybe too sophisticated for their business model. I realized David was incapable of seeing Trevor's flaws objectively. Blood was thicker than competence. The situation worsened when Trevor began proposing company-wide changes. During a senior team meeting, he presented his modernization initiative, a comprehensive plan to automate client interactions and reduce inefficient relationship overhead. "We're spending too much time on personal touches," Trevor explained, clicking through slides filled with charts and graphs. "Birthday cards, personal calls, family updates, these activities don't scale. We should implement CRM automation to handle routine relationship maintenance." My blood ran cold. Those inefficient personal touches were the foundation of every major client relationship I'd built. James Wright valued my handwritten notes about his daughter's college graduation. Maria Santos appreciated that I remembered her mother's health struggles. Robert Chan trusted me because I understood his cultural background and family priorities. "Trevor," I said carefully, "our clients specifically choose us because of the personal attention we provide. That's our competitive advantage." Trevor's response revealed his complete misunderstanding of our business. "That's old school thinking, Ellie. Modern clients want efficiency and results, not emotional hand-holding. We need to focus on deliverables, not relationships." Several team members exchanged concerned glances. These were experienced consultants who understood that relationships were deliverables in our industry. David, however, was nodding thoughtfully. "Trevor raises interesting points about scalability. We should consider how to grow more efficiently." After the meeting, I stayed behind to speak with David privately. "Are you seriously considering Trevor's proposals? Our entire business model is built on personal relationships. I'm not saying we implement everything immediately," David replied. "But Trevor's bringing fresh perspectives we need to consider. We can't stay stuck in the past forever." Stuck in the past? The past he was referring to was the 8-year period when I'd grown his company from $3 million to $500 million in annual revenue. My concerns deepened when David's assistant, Jenny, accidentally forwarded me an email thread between David and Trevor. The subject line read EJ Transition Strategy, and my heart sank as I realized EJ meant Ellie Jones. The emails were a calculated plan to gradually reduce my authority while positioning Trevor as my replacement. Trevor had written, "We need to be strategic about this transition. Ellie's got strong client relationships, but she's stuck in old methodologies. If we slowly shift her to a support role while I take lead on client interactions, we can modernize the approach without losing accounts. David's response was even more devastating. Agreed. Ellie's been invaluable, but she's reached her ceiling. Trevor, you're the future of this company. Let's start positioning you as the primary contact for major accounts. Ellie can handle implementation, while you manage strategy. I stared at the email for 20 minutes, rereading every word. 8 years of loyalty, and they were planning to demote me to an implementation role, while Trevor, who couldn't successfully present to a single client, took credit for my strategic work. The betrayal was complete, but it also clarified my situation. This wasn't about business efficiency or modernization. This was about David prioritizing family over merit, and I needed to protect myself accordingly. I immediately called Sarah Kim to schedule an emergency consultation. That evening, I sat in her office with printouts of the email thread and a detailed timeline of Trevor's failures. This is workplace discrimination based on familial favoritism, Sarah said after reviewing the evidence. The question is whether you want to fight it legally or position yourself for a strategic exit. What are my options for leaving? I asked. Sarah pulled out my employment contract and non-compete agreement, documents I hadn't examined carefully in years. After an hour of analysis, she looked up with a slight smile. Good news and bad news, she said. The bad news is you do have a non-compete clause. The good news is it's poorly written and probably unenforceable. She pointed to specific language. In the contract, look at this section. It prohibits you from engaging in competing business activities, but doesn't define what constitutes competing business. It also fails to specify geographic limitations or time restrictions clearly. My spirits lifted for the first time in weeks. What does that mean practically? It means if you're careful about how you position your departure and future employment, you have significant protection, especially if you can document that your termination or demotion was based on favoritism rather than performance. Sarah advised me to continue documenting everything while exploring my options quietly. Don't do anything that could be construed as sabotage or client poaching, she warned. But you're allowed to network professionally and explore opportunities. Over the next 2 weeks, I began researching Morrison's competitors while maintaining perfect professionalism at work. The most interesting discovery was Hamilton Strategic Partners, a firm that had been trying to compete with us for years with limited success. Hamilton's founder and CEO, Rachel Hamilton, was someone I'd met briefly at industry conferences. Her firm had talented consultants and solid methodologies, but they'd consistently lost bids to Morrison Associates specifically, to accounts I'd developed and managed. I found Hamilton's internal competitive analysis report published in a trade journal the previous year. The document was revealing. Morrison and Associates continues to dominate the market through superior client relationships and retention rates. Their key differentiator appears to be personalized service delivery that Hamilton has been unable to replicate. The report specifically mentioned several of my major accounts as examples of Morrison's market advantages. It was clear that Hamilton understood the value of relationship-based consulting, but struggled to execute it effectively. Decided to reach out professionally. LinkedIn showed that Rachel and I had several mutual connections, providing a natural networking opportunity. I sent a carefully worded message suggesting coffee to discuss industry trends. Rachel responded within hours, suggesting we meet that Friday at a downtown cafe. I was nervous but excited about exploring possibilities outside Morrison's increasingly toxic environment. The coffee meeting changed everything. Rachel was immediately interested when I mentioned my role at Morrison Associates, but her expression shifted to surprise when I explained my situation. Wait, she said, leaning forward. You're the Ellie Jones? The one who landed Megacorp and Global Dynamics? I nodded, unsure where this was leading. Rachel's next words were music to my ears. Ellie, I've been trying to compete with Morrison for 5 years. Every time we bid against you guys, we lose, and I've always suspected It was because of superior client relationships, not just better proposals. She was right. Hamilton's proposals were often technically superior to ours. But clients chose Morrison because they trusted our team specifically. They trusted me. I've been analyzing your accounts for years, Rachel continued. Not in a creepy way, she added quickly, but trying to understand how Morrison consistently wins. Now I realize it's because they have you. Rachel's offer was stunning in its directness. If you ever decide to leave Morrison, I want you here. Senior partner position, equity stake, and full resources to rebuild your practice. You bring your expertise and methodology. We provide the platform and support. What about my clients? I asked carefully. I can't ask you to violate any agreements, Rachel said. But if clients choose to follow exceptional service providers, that's their business decision. Our job would be to ensure we can serve them at the same level they're accustomed to. We spent 2 hours discussing possibilities. Rachel's vision for Hamilton aligned perfectly with my approach to consulting, relationship-based, client-focused, and ethically grounded. More importantly, she valued my contributions in a way David no longer seemed to. Think about it, Rachel said as we prepared to leave. I know this is a big decision, but you've already built an incredible practice once. Imagine what you could accomplish with proper support and recognition. That weekend, I researched Hamilton's strategic partners thoroughly. Their financial statements showed steady growth but limited major accounts. Their client satisfaction scores were high, but their market share remained small. Most tellingly, their business development efforts had stagnated, exactly what my expertise could address. Also researched the legal implications of potential client transfers. Sarah had been clear that I couldn't solicit clients while employed at Morrison, but clients were free to choose their service providers based on their preferences. More importantly, I discovered that most of my major client contracts included key personnel clauses, language specifying that certain consultants were essential to the service delivery. If those consultants left, clients had the right to terminate contracts or renegotiate terms. James Wright had specifically requested this language in Megacorp's contract after a previous consulting firm had switched his account manager without notice. Maria Santos had similar provisions at Pinnacle Systems. Robert Chen's contract at Global Dynamics included even stronger language about continuity of senior personnel. These clauses weren't unusual in the consulting industry, but they meant my departure would likely trigger client notifications and potential contract reviews. If clients chose to follow me to Hamilton, they'd be exercising their contractual rights, not responding to improper solicitation. Armed with this knowledge, I felt more confident about my options. David's betrayal had hurt deeply, but it was also liberating me to pursue opportunities I'd never considered while believing in his partnership promises. The next Monday, I returned to work with a new perspective. Instead of feeling trapped and undervalued, I felt empowered and strategic. David and Trevor were planning my professional funeral, but they had no idea I was preparing my resurrection. I began documenting everything more systematically: client interactions, business development, activities, strategic decisions, and Trevor's continued failures. Every email was saved. Every meeting was summarized, and every client conversation was carefully recorded. Most importantly, I started preparing detailed documentation of my client relationships, not for improper solicitation, but for my own protection. If David tried to claim I'd somehow damaged client relationships during my departure, I needed evidence of my consistent professionalism and value delivery. Trevor, meanwhile, continued his pattern of incompetence. His second solo presentation to a potential healthcare client ended with the prospect choosing a competitor after Trevor suggested they disrupt their patient care paradigms through blockchain integration. But David remained blind to these failures, instead praising Trevor's innovative thinking and strategic vision. The disconnect between reality and David's perceptions was becoming absurd. During our monthly team meeting, David announced that Trevor would begin shadowing senior client relationships to develop his strategic oversight capabilities. In plain English, Trevor would start attending my client meetings as preparation for eventually taking them over. This is a great opportunity for knowledge transfer, David explained. Trevor brings fresh perspectives, and our senior team can help him understand our client base. I smiled politely while internally preparing for war. David wanted knowledge transfer? I'd give him knowledge transfer, just not the kind he was expecting. The battle for my professional life was about to begin, and I finally had the weapons to fight it. The official transition began on a Monday morning in September. David had scheduled a team meeting to announce the new mentorship structure, where Trevor would shadow senior consultants to enhance his strategic oversight of key accounts. Trevor arrived 20 minutes late, carrying a coffee from the expensive place downtown, and wearing a suit that probably cost more than most of our junior consultants made in a month. He settled into the conference room like he owned it, which, I was beginning to realize, he essentially did. "Sorry I'm late," he said without looking sorry at all. Traffic was brutal coming from my new apartment downtown. David smiled indulgently. "No problem, Trevor. We were just reviewing the client shadowing schedule." The schedule was a masterpiece of strategic manipulation. Trevor would accompany me to every major client meeting over the next month, ostensibly to learn our methodologies, but really to position himself as my eventual replacement. The plan was transparent to everyone except David, who seemed genuinely convinced this was professional development rather than a corporate coup. "Trevor's going to bring fresh energy to these relationships," David announced. "I'm excited to see how his MBA perspectives can enhance our client strategies." I had prepared a document for Trevor outlining each client's background, preferences, and ongoing projects. It was professional, comprehensive, and completely wasted on someone who thought blockchain was the solution to every business challenge. Our first meeting was with James Wright at Megacorp's headquarters. I had briefed Trevor extensively during the drive over, explaining James's communication style, his company's culture, and the specific challenges we were addressing. "James values directness and hates corporate jargon," I emphasized. "He's been burned by consultants who oversell and underdeliver. Our relationship works because I focus on practical solutions and honest communication." Trevor nodded along, but I could tell he wasn't really listening. He was busy reviewing his MBA notes about executive engagement strategies and value proposition articulation. The meeting started well. James welcomed Trevor warmly after I introduced him as someone learning our client management approach. James even shared some advice about building successful consulting relationships. "The key," James told Trevor, "is understanding that every business problem has human elements. Ellie gets that. She doesn't just fix processes, she understands the people behind the processes." Trevor's response made me want to disappear into the floor. "That's interesting, James. In business school, we studied the evolution from relationship-based to results-based consulting. The trend is definitely toward more efficient, metrics-driven client interactions." The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. James's expression shifted from friendly to skeptical. "Efficient?" James asked. "Trevor, do you know why Megacorp chose Morrison Associates over 3 other firms?" Trevor launched into what I recognized as a rehearsed response about Morrison's strategic capabilities and innovative methodologies. James listened politely, then turned to me. "Ellie, would you mind explaining to Trevor why we really chose Morrison?" I knew this was a test, both for Trevor and for my own handling of the situation. "James, you chose us because we took time to understand your merger challenges. We provided realistic timelines instead of over-promising. And we committed to working with your existing team rather than replacing them." James nodded. "Exactly. And because Ellie was the only consultant who asked about my daughter's college plans during our first meeting. She understood that business decisions are made by human beings with full lives, not just corporate titles." Trevor looked confused. I'm not sure I understand the relevance of personal details to strategic consulting. James's patience was clearly wearing thin. Son, if you don't understand why personal relationships matter in business, you're in the wrong profession. The rest of the meeting was awkward. Trevor continued making suggestions that showed his complete misunderstanding of Megacorp's culture and challenges. He proposed streamlining decision-making hierarchies to a CEO who prided himself on collaborative leadership. He suggested optimizing human capital allocation to someone who viewed his employees as family members, not resources. After we left, I tried to explain what had gone wrong. James responds to authenticity and respect. When you suggest changing fundamental aspects of his leadership style, you're essentially telling him he's been doing his job wrong for 20 years. Trevor's response was infuriating. I think he's just resistant to new ideas. That's pretty common with older CEOs. They get comfortable with outdated management approaches. I realized Trevor was incapable of learning from feedback. In his mind, any resistance to his ideas was proof of the other person's limitations, not his own. The pattern repeated with every client meeting. At Pinnacle Systems, Trevor interrupted Maria Santos to suggest she leverage cross-functional synergies instead of listening to her concerns about budget constraints. Maria shot me a look that clearly said, "Is this really the future of Morrison Associates?" With global dynamics, Trevor made cultural assumptions that offended Robert Chun, suggesting that Asian markets required different strategic approaches without understanding Robert's American education and business background. Robert was polite, but distant for the rest of the meeting. Each disaster required careful damage control. I found myself sending follow-up emails apologizing subtly for interruptions, scheduling additional calls to address clients' real concerns, and working overtime to rebuild rapport that Trevor had damaged in minutes. The breaking point came during our 4th week of mentorship. I had arranged a presentation to the Global Dynamics Board about their expansion strategy, a project I've been developing for 6 months. Trevor was supposed to observe silently and learn about high-level client presentations. 10 minutes before the meeting, Trevor approached me with a stack of printed slides. "I put together some additional materials," he said proudly. "Thought we could enhance your presentation with some advanced strategic frameworks." I looked at his slides with growing horror. They were filled with generic MBA concepts that had nothing to do with global dynamics' specific situation. Worse, they contradicted several key recommendations I'd spent months developing with Robert's input. "Trevor, we can't change the presentation. Now, Robert and his board are expecting specific information based on our previous discussions." "Don't worry," Trevor said confidently. "I'll just add these as supplementary insights." Board members love seeing innovative thinking. The presentation was a disaster. I delivered my carefully prepared recommendations while Trevor sat quietly, but during the Q&A session, he stood up without invitation. "Before we conclude," Trevor announced, "I'd like to share some additional strategic perspectives that might be valuable." Robert looked surprised but nodded politely. Trevor launched into a 15-minute presentation about blue ocean strategies and disruptive innovation paradigms that had no connection to global dynamics' actual challenges or opportunities. Board members exchanged confused glances as Trevor suggested they pivot their core competencies toward emergent market verticals. One board member finally interrupted. "Excuse me, young man, but are you suggesting we abandon the expansion strategy we've been planning for 2 years?" Trevor, completely missing the hostile tone, nodded enthusiastically. "Sometimes you have to embrace creative destruction to achieve breakthrough growth." Robert's face had turned red with barely controlled anger. "I think we've heard enough," he said firmly. "Ellie, could you please summarize our next steps based on your original recommendations?" I spent 20 minutes repairing the damage, refocusing the discussion on practical implementation plans and realistic timelines. The board approved our original strategy, but the atmosphere remained tense. After the meeting, Robert pulled me aside. "Ellie, I need to ask directly, Is Morrison Associates changing its approach? Because if you're moving toward theoretical consulting instead of practical problem solving, we need to discuss our contract terms. I assured Robert that our commitment to practical solutions remained unchanged, but I could see doubt in his eyes. Trevor had damaged more than just one presentation. He'd threatened the trust foundation of our entire relationship. That evening, I called Rachel Hamilton. I think it's time to have a serious conversation about opportunities at Hamilton Strategic. Rachel suggested we meet for dinner the following Saturday to discuss details. I've been thinking about our conversation, she said. I have some specific ideas about how we could structure a partnership that would be beneficial for everyone. The dinner meeting was revelatory. Rachel had done extensive research on my client relationships and had a clear vision for how I could rebuild my practice at Hamilton Strategic Partners. Here's what I'm thinking, Rachel said. Spreading out financial projections and organizational charts. Senior partner position with immediate equity stake. You'd lead our new relationship strategy division with full autonomy to hire your team and develop your client portfolio. The financial package was impressive. Base salary 40% higher than my current compensation, plus equity participation that could be worth millions if Hamilton achieved its growth projections. More importantly, Rachel continued, you'd have complete support for your relationship-based approach. No pressure to automate personal touches or implement efficiency measures that compromise client satisfaction. We discussed the legal aspects carefully. Rachel had consulted with her attorneys about proper procedures for hiring senior consultants from competitors. The key is absolute professionalism, Rachel explained. You resign from Morrison with appropriate notice. We announce your hiring through normal channels, and if clients choose to follow you, that's their business decision based on service preferences. Rachel had even researched the key personnel clauses in my major client contracts. Most of your accounts have provisions allowing contract review if senior personnel change. That's standard protection for clients, not improper solicitation. I left dinner with a formal offer letter to review and a clear timeline for potential transition. Rachel wanted an answer within 2 weeks, understanding that timing would be crucial for both my departure and Hamilton's preparation to serve new clients. The next week at Morrison felt surreal. I continued working professionally, while Trevor made increasingly bold attempts to position himself as my replacement. During a team meeting, he actually suggested that my traditional approaches might be holding back the firm's modernization efforts. Ellie's done great work, Trevor said patronizingly, but we need to evolve beyond relationship-dependent strategies. Clients today want scalable solutions, not personal hand-holding. Several team members looked uncomfortable, but David nodded thoughtfully. Trevor raises valid points about efficiency and scalability. We should consider how to modernize our approach while maintaining client satisfaction. I realized David was beyond saving. His inability to recognize Trevor's incompetence was destroying everything we'd built together, and I was powerless to stop it. That Friday, I submitted my resignation letter to David. I had crafted it carefully with Sarah Kim's help, ensuring it was professional, legally sound, and subtly devastating. Dear David, it began. After 8 years of dedicated service to Morrison and Associates, I have decided to pursue new opportunities that better align with my professional values and career objectives. The letter continued with carefully chosen language. I am grateful for the opportunities I've had to develop client relationships and contribute to the firm's growth. I trust that the strong foundation we've built together will serve Morrison and Associates well in the future. The subtext was clear to anyone reading carefully. Ellie built the foundation, and she's leaving because her values no longer align with the company's direction. David's reaction was immediate and panicked. He called me into his office within an hour of receiving the letter, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly. Ellie, what's this about? We can work through whatever concerns you have. Your family here. Family. After 8 years of broken promises and watching him prioritize his actual family over merit, the word felt like a slap. David, I've made my decision, I said calmly. I'll work with you to ensure a smooth transition of my responsibilities. This is about Trevor, isn't it? David asked desperately. Look, maybe we moved too fast with his client involvement. We can adjust his role, give you more authority over client relationships. It was too late for negotiations. David was offering me crumbs of my own work after planning to hand it all to Trevor. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I've accepted a position elsewhere. I'll be here for 2 weeks to help with transition planning. David's desperation grew, more obvious as the reality sank in. What about your clients? You can't just leave them hanging. And your non-compete, my clients will be well cared for, I said evenly. And I've reviewed my legal obligations carefully. Everything will be handled appropriately. Trevor's reaction was predictably arrogant. This might actually be for the best, he told David within my hearing. Now we can implement modern strategies without resistance to change. If Trevor thought my departure would solve his problems, he was about to learn otherwise. My relationships with major clients weren't dependent on Morrison Associates. They were dependent on trust, competence, and genuine care. 3 qualities Trevor had never demonstrated. Over the weekend, I called Rachel to accept Hamilton Strategic's offer formally. I'll be available to start in 3 weeks, I told her. That gives me time to handle the transition professionally and prepare for new client relationships. Rachel was thrilled. We'll announce your hiring next week and begin preparing resources for your practice group. This is going to transform Hamilton Strategic. My final 2 weeks at Morrison were emotionally complex. I felt genuine sadness about leaving colleagues who had become friends, but overwhelming relief about escaping David's favoritism and Trevor's incompetence. Several team members approached me privately to express their disappointment about my departure and their concerns about the firm's direction. 2 senior consultants asked about opportunities at Hamilton Strategic, which I handled carefully to avoid any appearance of improper recruiting. The most telling moment came during my exit interview with HR. When asked about reasons for leaving, I was diplomatically honest. I felt my growth opportunities at Morrison had become limited, and I found an opportunity that better matches my professional values. HR pressed for specifics, but I remained professional. I believe Morrison will continue to be successful. I simply felt it was time for a change. My last day was surreal. David made a brief announcement thanking me for my contributions, while Trevor looked smugly confident about inheriting my responsibilities. I cleaned out my office, said goodbye to colleagues, and walked out of Morrison Associates for the final time. As I drove home, I felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. 8 years of my life were ending, but something better was beginning. David and Trevor had no idea what they'd just unleashed, that they were about to learn that loyalty is earned, not inherited, and that competence matters more than bloodlines. The real test was about to begin. 3 months after my departure from Morrison Associates, the consulting industry was buzzing with what trade publications had dubbed the Great Client Migration. The story was unprecedented. A single executive's departure had triggered the largest client exodus in consulting history, reshuffling market dynamics overnight. The numbers were staggering. Morrison Associates had lost $320 million in annual revenue within 90 days of my resignation. Megacorp, Pinnacle Systems, Global Dynamics, and 7 other major clients had terminated their contracts, citing changes in service personnel as grounds for departure under their key personnel clauses. Hamilton Strategic Partners, meanwhile, had transformed from a mid-tier firm to a market leader, adding $380 million in new business as clients followed me to my new home. The additional $60 million came from prospects who had been considering Morrison but chose Hamilton after learning about the talent acquisition industry trade. Weekly published a comprehensive analysis titled The Great Client Migration: How One Executive's Departure Reshuffled the Consulting Landscape. The article dissected the unprecedented client movement and its implications for relationship-based consulting. The Morrison-Hamilton talent transfer demonstrates the irreplaceable value of authentic client relationships. The article concluded, in an industry increasingly focused on automation and efficiency, this case study proves that personal trust remains the ultimate competitive advantage. Trevor's complete failure to retain even a single major client had become a cautionary tale about nepotism in professional services. His attempts to manage client relationships had been so disastrous that 2 prospects had publicly shared stories about his inappropriate behavior during presentations. David's public statements about the situation were increasingly desperate. First, he blamed market conditions and industry volatility. When that narrative fell apart, he claimed that departing clients were not aligned with Morrison's innovative vision. Finally, he resorted to suggesting that client departures were somehow coordinated, which only highlighted his complete misunderstanding of how business relationships actually work. The most damaging revelation came when a former Morrison employee leaked internal emails showing David's awareness of Trevor's failures months before my departure. The emails revealed that David had received multiple client complaints about Trevor's behavior, but had consistently dismissed them as resistance to change. One particularly damning email showed David writing to his wife, "Some clients are complaining about Trevor, but they'll adjust. Ellie's just territorial about her accounts. Once she's transitioned out, everyone will see that Trevor's approach is more efficient." The leak destroyed any remaining credibility David had in claiming that my departure was unexpected or that client losses were due to external factors. Industry observers could see clearly that David had prioritized family loyalty over business competence with predictable results. Morrison's attempts to rebuild were failing spectacularly. They hired 3 senior consultants from competitors, but without existing client relationships, these new hires struggled to generate meaningful revenue. David had fundamentally misunderstood that clients weren't loyal to the Morrison brand, they were loyal to the people who served them excellently. More humiliating for David was Trevor's quiet departure from the company after 6 months of mounting failures. Trevor had lasted exactly as long as his disastrous summer internship, proving that nepotism couldn't overcome incompetence indefinitely. Industry sources reported that Trevor had left consulting entirely, joining his father's real estate development company in a role that presumably required fewer client interaction skills. David's grand plan to build a family consulting dynasty had collapsed completely. Meanwhile, my transformation at Hamilton Strategic Partners exceeded even Rachel's optimistic projections. Within 6 months, I had been promoted to managing partner with a significant equity stake and full authority over our relationship. Strategy Division. The new partnership agreement was everything David had promised but never delivered. Genuine partnership, equity participation, and recognition of my contributions to the firm's success. More importantly, Hamilton's culture supported relationship-based consulting rather than trying to automate it away. I had also built an exceptional team. 3 senior consultants from Morrison had joined Hamilton within my first year, bringing their expertise and client relationships. We weren't poaching talent, we were providing opportunities for professionals who shared our values and wanted to practice consulting with integrity. James Wright had become one of my strongest advocates, referring 2 additional Fortune 500 companies to Hamilton based on his satisfaction with our service. Ellie understands that business is personal, he told industry colleagues. She doesn't just solve problems, she builds partnerships. Maria Santos had similarly become a source of referrals, connecting us with 3 technology companies seeking strategic consulting. Working with Ellie isn't just about getting advice, she explained. It's about having a trusted advisor who genuinely cares about your success. Robert Chun had expanded our engagement at Global Dynamics, adding 2 subsidiary companies to our portfolio. Ellie's cultural sensitivity and strategic thinking are exactly what growing companies need, he told prospects considering our services. The industry recognition was gratifying but secondary to the satisfaction of practicing consulting the way I believed it should be done. I was speaking at conferences about authentic relationship building, mentoring young consultants about ethical business development, and setting new standards for professional service excellence. Harvard Business Review published my article on relationship-based consulting in the digital age, which became one of their most shared pieces that year. The article argued that automation and efficiency were important tools, but they couldn't replace genuine human connection in professional services. Clients don't buy consulting services, I wrote. They buy trust, understanding, and results, delivered by people who care about their success. Technology can enhance these relationships, but it can never replace them. The article's popularity led to speaking opportunities at major industry conferences, where I shared lessons about building sustainable consulting practices based on authenticity rather than manipulation. 1 year after leaving Morrison, I reflected on the journey during a quiet evening in my new office overlooking the city. Hamilton Strategic Partners occupied the top 3 floors of a modern downtown building, and my corner office was larger and more elegant than anything I'd had at Morrison. But the real satisfaction wasn't about office space or titles. It was about the realization that David's betrayal had actually freed me to achieve greater success than I'd ever imagined possible. The partnership agreement on my desk represented everything I'd worked toward for 8 years at Morrison: equity ownership, decision-making authority, and recognition as a true business partner. Rachel had delivered on every promise, while David's promises had proven worthless. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Right, saw your Harvard Business Review article. Brilliant as always. Sarah graduates next month, thanks for the internship. Referral to Hamilton. She's excited to learn from the best. These were the relationships that mattered, built on mutual respect, genuine care, and consistent value delivery. Trevor had never understood that consulting success came from serving others excellently, not from leveraging family connections or business school theories. A knock on my office door interrupted my reflection. Rachel entered with a bottle of champagne and a broad smile. We just closed the Meridian Industries account, she announced. $15 million annually, and they specifically requested you as lead consultant. That puts us at $650 million in total revenue, 30% growth in 1 year. We toasted Hamilton's strategic success, but I was thinking about the broader lesson. David had spent 8 years building Morrison Associates into a successful firm, then destroyed it in 6 months through favoritism and poor judgment. Success, built on relationships and competence, was sustainable. Success built on nepotism and entitlement was fragile. Morrison Associates still existed, but as a shadow of its former self. David had been forced to sell majority ownership to a larger consulting firm to avoid bankruptcy. The new owners had kept him as a figurehead CEO but stripped him of real authority. Trevor was long gone, and David's dream of a family consulting dynasty had become an industry cautionary tale. 2 years after my departure, I was invited to speak at the annual Consulting Excellence Conference about building authentic client relationships in a competitive market. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now regarded as an industry thought leader, speaking to audiences that included consultants from Morrison Associates. My presentation focused on the principles that had guided my career: genuine care for client success, consistent value delivery, and ethical business practices. I shared specific examples of how relationship-based consulting had generated sustainable results for both clients and consulting firms. The consulting industry has a choice, I told the audience. We can pursue short-term efficiency through automation and cost-cutting, or we can invest in long-term relationships that create lasting value. The most successful firms will choose relationships. During the Q&A session, a young consultant asked about handling workplace politics and favoritism. I could see David sitting in the back row, listening intently to my response. Focus on excellence and documentation, I advised. Control what you can control: your performance, your relationships, and your professional reputation. When others make poor decisions based on favoritism rather than merit, those decisions will eventually reveal themselves. Your job is to be ready with alternatives when that happens. After the presentation, several consultants approached me about opportunities at Hamilton Strategic. Word had spread that we were building something special, a firm that valued talent over connections and results over politics. David approached me as I was packing up my materials. He looked older, grayer, and significantly less confident than the man who had once promised me partnership while planning my replacement. "Ellie," he said quietly, "could I have a word?" We stepped into a quiet corner of the conference lobby. David struggled with his words, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation he'd initiated. "I want you to know," he finally said, "that I realize I made mistakes. Serious mistakes. Trevor wasn't ready for the responsibilities I gave him, and I should have recognized that." I listened without interrupting, curious about where this was leading. "I also want you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my career. You built Morrison into what it was, and I took that for granted. I let family loyalty cloud my business judgment, and it cost me everything we built together." His admission was too little, too late, but I appreciated his honesty. "David, I understand. Family is important, but business decisions should be based on competence and merit, not relationships." "I know that now," he said sadly. "I watch what you've accomplished at Hamilton, and I realize what Morrison could have been if I'd made different choices. You deserved that partnership I kept promising. You earned it long before I ever considered bringing Trevor into the business." I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. David's acknowledgement of his mistakes didn't change the past, but it confirmed that my departure had been the right decision. "I hope you've learned from the experience," I said diplomatically. "Morrison still has good people who deserve strong leadership." "The new owners are talking about additional changes," David admitted. "I may not be CEO much longer." "Maybe that's for the best." We shook hands and David walked away. I felt closure about our relationship and satisfaction about the path I'd chosen. His betrayal had been painful, but it had led me to opportunities I never would have pursued otherwise. That evening, I opened my personal journal and wrote a final reflection on the journey that had transformed my career and my life. 2 years ago, I believed loyalty meant accepting broken promises and watching incompetence be rewarded over excellence. I thought leaving Morrison would mean starting over, rebuilding everything from scratch. Instead, I learned that loyalty must be mutual to be meaningful. David's betrayal freed me to find partners who truly valued my contributions. Rachel and Hamilton Strategic didn't just offer me a job, they offered me genuine partnership and the resources to build something extraordinary. The clients who followed me to Hamilton taught me that authentic relationships transcend company loyalty. James, Maria, Robert, and others didn't choose Hamilton Strategic. They chose to continue working with someone who had earned their trust through consistent excellence. Trevor's failures demonstrated that competence cannot be inherited or purchased. Business success requires genuine skill, hard work, and respect for others. No amount of family connection can substitute for actual ability. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing their true character. David's favoritism and Trevor's arrogance revealed that Morrison was no longer the right place for my talents. Their betrayal became my liberation. Today, Hamilton Strategic Partners is recognized as an industry leader. I have the partnership I always deserved, and my clients receive the excellent service they expect. David's attempt to replace me with his unqualified nephew resulted in his company's decline and my unprecedented success. The lesson for anyone facing similar betrayals: document everything, know your worth, and never be afraid to bet on yourself. Sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding beyond what those who betrayed you ever thought possible. Excellence speaks louder than favoritism. Competence outlasts connections, and integrity always wins in the long run. I closed the journal and looked out at the city lights below. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new relationships to build. But tonight, I was grateful for the journey that had brought me here, even the painful parts that had ultimately led to something better than I'd ever imagined. David Morrison had tried to hand my life's work to his unqualified nephew. Instead, he had given me the motivation to build something far greater than what we'd created together. In trying to diminish me, he had freed me to soar. The sweetest victory wasn't revenge, it was simply being appreciated for who I was and what I could accomplish when given the chance to shine.